Today I'm going to start out by telling a story that illustrates in very clear terms the one quality that distinguishes people who become success and those who don't. So the story starts. It was the late '90s. I was working as a lawyer. I worked in a big downtown Boston law firm for a few years. I worked for the government, and I decided to go out on my own and start my own law practice in downtown Boston. And by that point, I don't know, it wasn't quite a year. It was maybe 6, 8 months, and it was doing okay. It's tough starting a business, but it definitely had not taken off. I was a business litigator, which means I did litigation for businesses. I did all my work by the hour. I didn't work on a contingency. In other words, I didn't get a percentage of recovery like a personal injury lawyer might. I got a call from a guy who I had never heard of. His name was Steve, and he told me he had a potential case I might be interested in taking. And that he was referred actually by my old law firm to me. So I said, sure, come on in. So he came to my office. He was a young guy. He was Taiwanese. He was a PhD student in one of the Ivy League schools. And he told me it was kind of a very sad story about his family business. So his dad had started an electronic company in Taiwan a couple decades ago, was super successful. He was older now, turned the business over to his son, Steve's brother, James, and they entered into a very big transaction with a local, distributor of electronic products. And so Steve described it that the local business signed the contracts. The company, which was not a big company in Taiwan, as a manufacturer, sort of mobilized all the resources, including all their finances, to buy all the supplies and everything else. Was starting production after investing an enormous amount of their capital on executing these contracts. Were going to really take them to the next level. And then the local distributor of electronics products pulled the plug. And at that point, it was too late. They'd already invested their entire capital, their business, and everything just imploded, and the business was done basically. And he described that to me, and it was very sad. But it also sounded like it would have been a very, very difficult case to pursue. And he wanted somebody to take it on a contingency. He said, I have no money, or we have no money to invest in a big, multi-year lawsuit, but we suffered such loss, and our ability to prove our case is so clear. Whoever takes this case could really make some good money. That's what he said. And I explained, I just don't take these kind of cases. I'm not really set up to do that. And he kind of almost begged me to take the case. He said, I've been to 5, top law firms in town. They all declined. This is you're my last shot here. And, he said, my father is he's so distraught. He just wants to die. James is distraught. Just please consider taking this case. And, part of me just felt compassion for this guy. But the other thing was I did see an opportunity there. I don't think I could have tried the case, actually taken the case to trial. But, a lot of these cases, it's all about the investigation, kind of make out the case, and then, hopefully you can settle it. So I asked him a lot of questions, an awful lot of questions about exactly what happened. And he had a great answer for every single one of them. And I said, I normally don't take cases I've never taken a case on a contingency basis, but you know what, I'll do this one. So I jumped in. One of the things I wasn't expecting, which made it even more difficult, was, when I had to kind of sort of make the case, build the case on liability, our ability to show that the local distributor, just completely breached this contract, they were at fault. The real trick was going to be improving damages, proving that my client, this Taiwanese electronics manufacturer, actually invested all this money. So, I said, Steve, just send me all the documents. Let me take a look at them. I get this box of documents, and they're all in Chinese. So I said, okay, this isn't good. In order to kind of demonstrate to the lawyer for the local company that his client is in big trouble if this case goes to trial, I need to translate all these, or at least have summaries of every single document and show that your damages are in the millions. And he said, all right. So we worked out an arrangement where we had James fly in from Taiwan, and James, Steve, and I sat in a conference room for I don't know how many hours, and we just went through document after document, documenting this all. So again, I didn't think I could possibly try, and I wasn't a trial lawyer, so I didn't have a lot of experience trying cases, but I was good at settling them. So I set up a meeting with the local manufacturer's lawyer, their president, representative. I was in a conference room all day and just slugged it out, and I had to be the nice guy because I was there, saying, hey, if this case was a trial, you guys are in big trouble, but you also really did this family dirty, and kind of show them that, it's the right thing to do to at least compromise so that if the case goes to trial, they could lose a ton of money, but let's find some middle ground here. At the end of the day, it was grueling. The lawyer for the distributor of the electronics product was a tough lawyer, and his client, she was pretty tough as well. And I just had to alternate between being the nice guy, but also just cutting to the quick in terms of showing that, if they get before a jury on this case, the jury is going to be so sympathetic to my client, and it's crystal clear they just screwed our client, so badly. So, I ended up getting this recovery I never thought in a million years I can get. It was huge, and nice. The good news is, I got a third of it. It set me up, and got my practice off the ground. It was, a big nest egg that. I was able to, basically buy my first house. So, and so here's the lesson to be learned from that. What the story illustrates is that, the one quality that you need in order to be a success is it's the ability to recognize an opportunity, a really good opportunity where nobody else can see it. The great opportunities aren't going to be obvious to the average person because otherwise somebody else will grab it. They're the ones that, you need to kind of peel back the layers and look underneath it and see that, something that might look like kind of a potential disaster, or just oh man, what that's going to be just an enormous amount of work, and the chances of this succeeding are minimal. And seeing beyond that, and asking a lot of questions, sort of keeping your eyes and your ears open, and saying, if I leverage, my skills, my abilities, my effort into this, can I turn this into something valuable? Can I turn this into something that could be hugely successful? I think a lot of it comes from starting with a positive attitude that, a great opportunity is just around the corner. You absolutely need that in order to identify sort of the diamond in the rough. For me, that positive attitude that, great things can come from, circumstances that may not look so great at the outset, come from my spirituality, from my relationship with God. I feel like, on the day that I, sort of turned my life over to God and said, God, I'm here on earth to help do your good work, I feel like, He's at my side. So, the next opportunity, the springboard into, greater success in whatever area that is, whether it's in career, relationships, parenting, I feel like, God's in my corner, and, the potential for just enormous success, payback, hitting, getting that brass ring, is within my reach. And the other thing I would say is what's I think really important is to recognize that when you start looking at a potential opportunity, it's very easy to sort of delude yourself and convince yourself that there's something there that really isn't. So what you don't want to do is, just not have a very critical eye when a potential, whether it's a business deal or it's a job offer, comes along. You do want to, be a super hard critic and ask the real hard questions, and not just convince yourself that, well, this I think this is it. So there's got to be a certain level of, although you need to have a positive attitude, you also got to be, a little cynical, because, there's potential opportunities that come along all the time. And, it's that one in, whatever, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 100, that you seize on. And, you don't need a lot of them. You don't need a lot of, springboards. You don't need a lot of offers. You only need 1 or 2 every so often to really do well. So I think that's the other thing is, just make sure you don't convince yourself, tell yourself like, oh, maybe this, I think this is it. Just so that you then take the leap. Got to be very careful about that. And then the last is certainly not the least is, in order to actually turn lemons into lemonade potentially, which is what you have to do with a good opportunity. Because again, it's not gonna come in a gift box with a bow and and have a label on that says $10 million. It's not going to say that. It's probably gonna look like a wrecked car, like driving up your driveway. But in order to kind of turn, like I said, lemons into lemonade, you got to be kind of physically ready. You always have to be. So what does that mean? You got to be mentally and physically fit, and that's sort of the foundation to everything in terms of becoming successful. So that means, number one, get good nutrition. I think that the top of the list there is limit sugar, limit alcohol. Number two, this sounds silly, but drink a lot of water actually is like the key to good health, mental health and physical health. Exercise, of course. Get plenty of sleep on a regular sleep schedule. Like if you are, up at night, having cocktails and you wake up a little mildly hungover every morning, or watching reruns of, Gilligan's Island till 2, 3 in the morning, and you wake up tired every morning, number one, you're not going to recognize a good opportunity. You're not going to have a positive attitude, but you're also not going to have the energy and the fortitude to make something good happen from that. And last but not least, of the 5 key cornerstones of good health is, have a good relationship with God. Pray regularly. Like I said, having that confidence that God is in your corner is certainly a key to success. Before we go, I want to give you one more story of an opportunity that came along my way, that I recognized that it had real potential, but it came at the absolute worst time. But it wasn't going to wait for me. So I had to kind of, do what I felt was the near impossible and jump on this and do the work at a time when it was just the last thing I needed at that moment. Really, really briefly, I was, this was like right soon after I had my initial meeting with Steve and took on the case of the Taiwanese electronics company. I got a call, well, before I got the call from my friend Mike, it was September of 1999. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was doing my laundry. I did what I always do. I throw my stuff in the washing machine. I go for a walk. I was on this kind of side road, and I get hit by this guy in a motorcycle, a Kawasaki Ninja bike. He was doing a wheelie, falls off the bike. The bike, I didn't even see it coming. The bike hits me from behind, throws me, breaks like basically all the bones on the right side of my body. 9 ribs, my femur, my pelvis, lacerated my liver. I was a mess. I was at Mass General for weeks, and I was in rehab. My parents had to move up and take care of me. It was a disaster. So, I was home. I was in a wheelchair recovering, and I get a call from my very good friend Mike, who's a lawyer. He worked for sort of a plaintiff's class action firm, and he called me up and he said, I've got this matter, this case that would be really great. He said, I know you're a little under the weather, to say the least, but this could really be a really great opportunity for you if you can muster the strength to do this. He said, the case my firm brought against this big insurance company, a lot of their salespeople across the board were really puffing in selling this one insurance vehicle, and the case is settling. So as part of the settlement, the insurance company agreed to have all of these policies that were sold looked at by a panel of 20 judges, and the judges will evaluate them on a scale from like 1 to 5 on the sort of the level up liability and culpability, and then we will award certain amounts to each potential claimant based on the score that they got. So again, it's going to be 20 judges looking at these case files, evaluating them, giving them a number. And he said, right now, we as I said, we need 20 judges. We've got like 17 of them, and they're all like really prestigious state Supreme Court judges and really high level judges. We want to make sure that we're getting good people to evaluate these, and the insurance company required that. But we've got 3 slots left, and we need to get going on this. So we're going to just private practice lawyers. And he said, Spencer, if you can do this, it could be a great opportunity. It's paying $12,500 a month, and I was like, wow, that's good money. And I got a sense of like, all right, I've got to do like X number of case files a month. And I said, I think I can do that. He said, but here's the one thing. You've got to go check into this hotel for this. It was a 1-week training where all the judges were going to be there. And I was like, Mike, like I'm in a wheelchair. My parents are in my apartment, basically helping me dress and, eat. like I didn't even have use of one of my arms. And he was like, I know, but if there's any way you can do it, just get through that week at that hotel. This could really be a good deal. And it's going to go for at least a year or two. So, making $12,500 a month for that amount of time was something I really had to think long and hard about. So I just said, all right, I got to do this. So, I found, so the hotel actually had, handicap rooms. My parents couldn't come with me. So thankfully, the other panelists, the other judges, they were so awesome. They would get my food for me and they would wheel me around. And, the bottom line is I made it through the week. And then, as time went on, I started to recover a little better. And I think, after a few weeks, I was back in my law office. Here's the thing. I get this box of files. And as it turned out, I think I only had to do I would say maybe 10 a week, review them. And, the files were like this thick, but there were maybe 2 or 3 pages that you actually had to look at and evaluate. So I was able to do that. And the scores were basically simple. You could just easily just assign a score based on the review of sort of the claim and the person's description of what was said. And most of the information in the file was irrelevant to, whether or not the insurance agent was really culpable, sort of guilty of puffing or lying. So I was able to, evaluate each of those files in probably I would say 10 minutes each. So I was doing 2 hours of work a month and making, $12,000 a month for 2 hours work. And that went on for, I think it was 18 months. So between the case that settled and that gig, which turned out to be very lucrative, again, I was able to buy my house, kind of set me up. Now, it didn't make me super rich, but for me, it was a very, very important lesson learned. That for me, it was identifying an opportunity when it came along. The second one was a little more obvious, but secondly, when the opportunity comes, you got to do whatever you have to do to leverage it and make the most of it. So anyway, that's my story for today. Definitely do keep the comments coming. I love hearing from you, and we'll see you next time.